There is a scene in the fourth season of Dexter where Arthur Mitchell, a man who has been murdering people in groups of 3 for 30 years, sits down to dinner with his family. His wife does not look at him. His children eat without speaking. The table is full of food and completely silent, and the silence is the most frightening thing in the scene. John Lithgow plays that silence perfectly. The Golden Globe he won for it is sitting somewhere, confirming that other people noticed. Dexter ran for 8 seasons, produced one of the most hated finales in television history, came back for a revival, killed its main character, and is currently still producing new content. This is a show about a serial killer who only kills bad people. And the story of why that premise was always going to collapse under its own weight is more interesting than most of what aired after season 4. Section 1. The premise was a ticking time bomb. From day 1, Dexter Morgan killed people for a living. Both kinds of living. During the day, he worked for the Miami Metro Police Department as a blood spatter analyst. The guy who shows up at murder scenes and reads the story of what happened from the patterns on the walls and floors. At night, he stalked, captured, and killed criminals who had escaped justice. He had a whole system for it. Plastic wrap on the kill table, a ritual with photos of the victims, a specific way of moving through the world that kept him invisible to everyone around him. He had been doing this since he was a teenager. By the time the show begins, he had killed dozens of people. And the show wanted you to love him for it. That is the deal Dexter makes with its audience in the very first episode. Not a complicated deal, not a hidden one. A completely open, completely deliberate arrangement. The show tells you exactly who Dexter is, tells you exactly what he does, and then constructs everything around him in a way that makes you want him to get away with it. The victims he chooses are monsters, child killers, rapists, people who have murdered whole families and walked free on technicalities. The show is careful about this. Every person Dexter puts on that table has done something so horrific that most viewers feel nothing when he kills them. Some feel relief. That feeling of relief is exactly where the problem starts. Because the show is not just asking you to accept that Dexter kills people. It is asking you to believe that his kills are good. That when Dexter wraps a man in plastic and drives a blade through his chest, the world is better for it. The show builds an entire moral framework around this idea, called the Code of Harry, after Dexter's adoptive father. And for the first couple of seasons, that framework holds. The code says Dexter can only kill people who have been confirmed guilty by the justice system and slipped through it anyway. He has to do his research. He has to be sure. This makes him feel less like a killer and more like a correction, a patch in a system that keeps letting the worst people walk free. The trap inside this setup is invisible at first, but it is total. Dexter cannot grow. He cannot change in any meaningful direction without destroying what makes the show work. Think about what the options actually are. If Dexter gets caught, the show ends. And not in a way that feels earned, because the audience has spent however many seasons being trained to root against the people closing in on him. If Dexter starts killing innocent people, or making mistakes that hurt people who do not deserve it, the audience loses the moral permission they need to enjoy watching him. If Dexter genuinely decides to stop killing, the show has no premise at all. And if Dexter keeps doing exactly what he has always done, the show goes in circles forever, which is eventually what happened. Every long-running drama about a morally complicated character has to answer one question eventually. Where does this go? Breaking Bad answered it by letting Walter White become genuinely evil and tracing that transformation from the first episode to the last. The Sopranos answered it by refusing to let Tony Soprano ever truly change, and making that refusal the point. Both of those shows could let their main characters fail, suffer real consequences, and be held accountable in ways that felt honest, because neither show had asked you to believe the main character was actually good. Dexter had asked you to believe exactly that. And once you build that into the foundation of a show, you cannot take it back without the whole thing collapsing. The Code of Harry is the clearest version of this problem. Harry Morgan, Dexter's adoptive father, a Miami police detective, discovered when Dexter was a boy that something was deeply wrong with him. Rather than getting him help, Harry made a decision that is strange the more you think about it. He decided to train Dexter to channel his urge to kill toward people who deserved it. He taught Dexter forensic awareness, how to avoid leaving evidence, how to choose targets, how to move through the world without being noticed. Harry built Dexter into a weapon, and then gave the weapon a code of conduct. The show presents this as a kind of love. Harry could not cure his son, so he protected him, and by extension, protected everyone Dexter might have hurt without guidance. There is a version of this that is genuinely heartbreaking. A father who sees something monstrous in his child and refuses to abandon him, who does his best with an impossible situation. But the code has a crack running through it that the show never fully addresses. Harry decided, a single police officer, with no court, no jury, no oversight, that some people deserve to die, and that his adopted son should be the one to kill them. He decided this in private, taught it to a child, and built an entire system of extrajudicial killing on that decision. The show frames the code as a moral guardrail. Looked at more directly, it is one man deciding he gets to determine who lives and who dies, and then raising a child to carry that decision out. Dexter believes in the code completely. He follows it, mostly. He does his research, he confirms guilt, he goes through his ritual. But the code is not justice. It is one person's idea of justice, with no checks on it, no appeals, no possibility of error being corrected. And the show eventually acknowledges this. There is a moment in the later seasons where Dexter kills someone who turns out to be innocent. But it never fully reckons with what that means. It treats the error as a temporary crisis, rather than proof that the entire system Harry built was broken from the start. Here is the deeper problem. The show needs Dexter to be sympathetic. That is the whole product. A Dexter who is genuinely terrifying, genuinely wrong, genuinely someone the audience should want stopped. That is a different show entirely, and not one Showtime was making. So every season, the writers have to perform a careful balancing act. They have to give Dexter enough humanity that you keep rooting for him. They have to make his victims bad enough that you feel nothing when he kills them. They have to make the people chasing him just incompetent enough that his escapes feel earned rather than absurd. And they have to do all of this without ever fully resolving the question of whether what Dexter does is actually right. The show manages this balance for roughly 4 seasons. During that stretch, the balancing act is genuinely impressive. The writing is sharp enough, the character work strong enough, the seasonal antagonists compelling enough that the central contradiction stays in the background. You feel it if you press on it, but you do not press on it, because the show keeps moving fast enough that pressing feels beside the point. Then the balancing act starts to slip. And when it slips, you suddenly feel the full weight of what the show has been standing on, which turns out to be a single question it can never honestly answer. Does Dexter deserve to keep going? If the answer is yes, the show has to keep protecting him, keep making his enemies stupid, keep finding new killers for him to hunt, keep giving him new emotional anchors to replace the ones that get destroyed. This produces diminishing returns every season because the audience has seen the trick enough times to see through it. If the answer is no, if Dexter does not deserve to keep going, then the show has to end. And ending means accountability. It means Dexter facing what he actually is, not what the code says he is. The original showrunner Clyde Phillips understood this. When he left after season 4, he carried with him a specific idea for how the show should end. Dexter on an execution table, all his victims watching from the observation gallery as the lethal injection is administered. The entire series revealed as the final seconds of a condemned man's life playing back in his mind. That ending would have answered the question directly. It would have said, no, he did not deserve to keep going. The law caught him eventually. He died for what he did. That ending never happened. The show ran 4 more seasons without the person who knew where it was going. And the ending it actually produced, Dexter faking his death and living as a lumberjack in Oregon, became one of the most mocked series finales in television history, precisely because it refused to answer the question the premise had been building toward for 8 years. The premise of Dexter is a clock. It starts running the moment you decide to make a serial killer your hero and ask an audience to root for him. Every season that passes, every escape, every reset, every new villain introduced to buy the show more time, the clock keeps running. The show can slow it down. It can distract from it. It can dress it up in enough emotional complexity that most viewers do not consciously register that the clock is there. But it cannot stop it. Eventually, every show built on a contradiction has to meet that contradiction. The longer it waits, the worse the meeting. Dexter waited 8 seasons and a revival miniseries before it finally said out loud what the premise had always implied: that a man who kills people, even bad people, even people who deserved it by any measure he could construct, cannot keep doing that forever without the universe presenting a bill. Clyde Phillips said it plainly after the New Blood finale in 2022. Dexter is an anti-hero, which is still a hero we like, but he is still someone who kills people, and killing people is wrong. That sentence, that simple, obvious sentence, took the show 15 years and a complete reboot to say. The fact that it took that long is not a production failure. It is not a writing failure. It is a premise failure. The show was always going to have this problem. The moment someone decided to build a drama around a serial killer the audience was supposed to love, the clock started. Everything that followed, every great season, every terrible one, every creative decision that made sense, and every one that did not, was just the sound of that clock running down. The premise was a gift and a trap at the same time. The gift was a lead character more original than almost anything else on television at the time. The trap was that the character's originality was inseparable from a contradiction the show could never resolve. And the contradiction ran right through the middle of everything the show would ever try to build. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings up something the show tried to build in its 2nd season. A character who saw through Dexter completely, understood exactly what he was, and had the evidence to prove it. What the show did to that character tells you everything about how desperate the premise could make the writers, and how far they were willing to go to protect a story they could never truly finish. Section 2. Dokes. The show killed its most honest character to save its premise. Sergeant James Dokes knew. Not suspected. Not had a feeling. Not was keeping an eye on things. Dokes knew, in his bones, from the very first season of the show, that Dexter Morgan was wrong in a way that went far beyond anything he could put into a report or bring to a superior. He could not prove it yet. He did not have the specific words for it yet. But the knowledge was there, solid and real, from the moment the two of them shared screen space. Where everyone else at Miami Metro saw a quiet, helpful, blood spatter expert who brought donuts and kept to himself, Doak saw something else entirely. A mask sitting on top of a void, worn by someone who had learned exactly how to behave like a person without actually being one. This is not a reading that requires much work. The show is explicit about it. Dokes watches Dexter the way a dog watches a stranger who smells wrong. He tracks him. He follows him on his own time. He makes Dexter's life uncomfortable in the specific way that only someone who is right about you can. And Dexter, whose internal monologue is the engine of the whole show, acknowledges it constantly. He is not annoyed by Dokes the way he is annoyed by a bureaucratic obstacle. He is unnerved by him. Dokes is the one person in Dexter's professional world who cannot be managed, cannot be charmed, and cannot be redirected. In Season 2, Dokes catches Dexter in the act. He has been following him. He put a GPS tracker on Dexter's boat. He traces him out to the Florida Everglades, where Dexter is in the middle of disposing of a dismembered body, chopping it up and dropping it piece by piece into the water. Dokes arrives, draws his gun, and has Dexter dead to rights. Not circumstantially, not on a hunch. He is standing there, watching it happen, with the evidence in front of him. Dexter knocks him out and puts him in a cage. This is the most important moment in the entire run of the show, and most people do not realize it when they are watching it the first time. Because what happens next, over the following episodes of Season 2, is the show revealing exactly what it is willing to do to keep its premise alive. Dokes is right. He is unambiguously, completely, no room for argument right. He has caught the Bay Harbor butcher. He is a decorated sergeant in the Miami Metro Police Department, a former Army Ranger with a record of legitimate service. He has done everything correctly. He has followed his instincts, done his own investigation on his own time, and arrived at the truth. And the show has to destroy him. There is no other option. A show where Dokes succeeds is a show that ends in Season 2 with Dexter in handcuffs. The audience rooting for Dexter, which is the entire commercial and creative project, requires Dokes to fail. So the show builds a mechanism for his failure. And the mechanism it builds is worth examining closely, because it is one of the most honest things the show ever accidentally revealed about itself. While Dexter is holding Dokes captive in the cabin in the Everglades, a woman named Lila West, a character introduced that season as a romantic interest for Dexter, tracks the cabin using a GPS device she stole from Dexter. She arrives at the cabin. She finds Dokes locked in the cage. She understands immediately what is happening, and she makes a decision. She turns on the propane valve, locks Dokes inside, walks away, and lets the cabin explode with him in it. Dokes burns to death in a cage, locked there by the man he was trying to bring to justice, finished off by a woman who wanted to protect that man. The police find his charred body surrounded by Dexter's equipment and trophies. The case closes. Sergeant James Dokes, who served his country, who worked homicide, who was the only person in the entire building who saw through the performance, is officially named the Bay Harbor Butcher and dies with that label attached to his name permanently. Dexter feels bad about it. His internal monologue says so. But he moves on. This is the clearest possible demonstration of what the show's premise demands. Every season, some force has to close in on Dexter. The tension of the show depends on it. But every season, that force also has to be neutralized, because the show cannot end, and Dexter cannot face real consequences. So the show cycles through variations of the same move. Someone gets close. Someone pays for getting close. Dexter survives. The season resets. Dokes is the most extreme version of this cycle because Dokes was the most legitimate threat. He was not a corrupt cop who could be discredited. He was not a rookie making rookie mistakes. He was a sharp, experienced investigator who was completely right and had the proof. The only way to stop him was to kill him, frame him, and make sure nobody credible was around to keep asking his questions. What the show loses when it kills Dokes is harder to measure, but important to sit with. Dokes functions as the show's conscience in a way that none of the other characters can. Deborah Morgan is Dexter's sister, and is emotionally too close to him to be objective. The rest of Miami Metro is oblivious by design. The FBI agent Frank Lundy, who arrives to run the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, is perceptive, but working from incomplete information. Dokes is the only character who combines direct personal knowledge of Dexter, proximity to the investigation, and no emotional attachment that would compromise his judgment. When Dokes dies, the show loses its internal check. There is no one left who sees Dexter clearly from inside his professional world. Every subsequent season has to introduce a new external threat, a new person who gets close, a new investigation that nearly catches him. But none of those threats carry the same weight, because none of those characters have the history with Dexter that Dokes had. They are starting from suspicion. Dokes had moved past suspicion into certainty. That is a fundamentally different kind of pressure, and the show never replaced it. The other thing worth noting about Dokes is how the show frames his death emotionally. It is framed as a loss, yes. Dexter mourns it in his clinical, disconnected way. But the framing never fully sits with the reality of what happened, which is that an innocent man, a flawed man, a sometimes brutal man, but a man who was doing the right thing, was murdered and then had his reputation destroyed to protect a serial killer. The show does not want to spend too much time on this, because spending time on it would require the audience to genuinely reckon with what Dexter is and what his existence costs other people. That reckoning is exactly what the show was designed to avoid. Consider what Dokes represents structurally. He is proof that the world of the show contains people who are actually good at their jobs. The fantasy of the show, that Dexter can operate invisibly inside a police department, surrounded by trained investigators, for years without anyone noticing, requires the department to be collectively incompetent enough that one man with a hobby can outmaneuver all of them indefinitely. Dokes breaks that fantasy. He is proof that competence exists in this world, that the system can work, that someone inside Miami Metro is sharp enough to see what is in front of him. So the fantasy eats him. After Dokes is gone, Miami Metro returns to its baseline of convenient blindness. Colleagues miss obvious clues. Evidence is not followed up on. Dexter visits crime scenes he has no reason to be at, handles evidence he should not touch, behaves in ways that any genuinely attentive detective would flag immediately. And nobody flags it. The show needs this. The plot requires it. But every time it happens, the ghost of Dokes is there. as a reminder that the show already showed you what a competent version of this department looks like, and then burned it alive in a cage in the Everglades to keep the premise running. There is a line Dexter delivers in Season 2, watching the situation with Dokes deteriorate, watching the mess he is making get bigger and harder to contain. He says, "For such a neat monster, he is leaving an awfully big mess." He means it about the investigation, about the bodies being found, about the close calls piling up. But the line applies to the show itself with uncomfortable accuracy. The premise keeps expanding the mess. Every season that passes, every corner the writers paint themselves into, every character who has to be killed or discredited or conveniently forgotten to keep Dexter safe, the mess grows. Dokes was not the only person who paid the price for it. He was just the first one to pay it in a way that was impossible to ignore. By the time Season 2 ends, and Dokes is officially named the Bay Harbor Butcher, the pattern is locked in. The show has demonstrated that it will sacrifice any character, no matter how well built, no matter how legitimate their function in the story, to protect the central premise. This is not a criticism of the individual writers who made these choices. They were working within a structure that had been set at the very beginning, a structure that left them almost no room. Once you decide your show is about a serial killer who the audience loves and roots for, every character who threatens that love has to go. What changes after Dokes is the quality of the threats. Every antagonist who comes after him, every investigator, every rival, every person who gets too close, is working from a disadvantaged position that Dokes never had. They are guessing, or they have partial information, or they have personal complications that muddy their judgment. Dokes had none of those problems. He was clean. He was right. He was going to win. The show could not let him win. And in making sure he did not, the show told you something important about the 8 seasons that followed. Every time someone got close to Dexter afterward, every time a new threat appeared and then dissolved, every time the show reset to safety, remember the cage. Remember Dokes shouting through the bars that they were going to have to kill him. Remember that he was correct, and that the show agreed with him by doing exactly that. The promise the show made when it killed Dokes was that consequences would always bend around Dexter. No matter who was right, no matter how much evidence existed, no matter how legitimate the case against him became. That promise held for 8 seasons. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the architect who built that promise, the showrunner who created the world, who set the rules, who understood where all of it was supposed to go, was about to walk away from it at the exact moment the show reached its highest point. Which means everything that happened next had nobody at the wheel who could keep the promise from becoming a prison. Section 3. The showrunner departure. After Season 4, the show lost its architect at its peak. Season 4 of Dexter is, by almost every measure, the best the show ever got. John Lithgow plays Arthur Mitchell, a man the press calls the Trinity Killer, named for his pattern of killing in groups of 3. On the surface, Mitchell is a pillar of his community. He runs a church group. He builds homes for the homeless. He is a grandfather, a husband, a respected figure in his neighborhood. Underneath all of that, he is one of the most terrifying characters in the history of American television drama. Not because of what he does to strangers, but because of what he does to his own family. His wife and children live in quiet, constant terror of him. His home is a crime scene that never gets reported. The smile he puts on for the world is so complete and so practiced that the gap between the public face and the private reality becomes genuinely disturbing to watch. Lithgow won a Golden Globe for the performance. The show won a Peabody Award. Week after week through season 4, the ratings climbed. The season premiere drew 1.5 million viewers. The finale drew 2.6 million, the most watched episode in Showtime's history at that point. Critics were using words like masterpiece. Fans were treating it as a genuine television event. By every commercial and creative measurement available, Dexter in season 4 was operating at the peak of what it could be. And then the man who built it left. Clyde Phillips had been the showrunner of Dexter since the beginning. He did not write the pilot. James Manos Jr. did that. But Phillips came in immediately after and reshaped the show from the ground up, even reshooting some scenes from the pilot before the first season aired. He ran the writer's room for 4 seasons. He oversaw 48 episodes. Under his leadership, the show earned 18 Emmy nominations, including 3 for Outstanding Drama Series. The writing staff received Writers Guild of America nominations for 3 consecutive seasons, for Season 2, Season 3, and Season 4. Phillips himself received a Peabody Award alongside the show in 2007. He left because his family was in the East and the show was produced in Los Angeles. He spent 9 months of each year away from his wife and daughter, who was turning 13. He said he was working extremely hard to pay for a life he was not living. The decision was, by his own description, hugely difficult. He drove home from a season 4 viewing party the night of the finale with complicated feelings about it. The decision was personal and understandable. The consequences were professional and enormous. Phillips was replaced by Chip Johannesson, a writer who had previously worked on the show 24. Johannesson ran season 5 and then left after a single season. He was replaced by Scott Buck, who took over as showrunner from season 6 through the end of the original series run in season 8. That is 2 showrunner changes in 2 seasons, following the departure of the man who had built the entire creative foundation of the show. For context on why this matters, a showrunner on an American television drama is not simply a supervisor. The showrunner is the primary creative vision behind everything. They run the writer's room, which means they determine what the season is about, what the characters do, how the plots connect, what themes are being explored, and where the story is going. They approve scripts. They work with directors. They are the person who holds the entire season in their head as a coherent thing and makes sure all the individual pieces are serving that coherent whole. Losing a showrunner is not like losing a writer or a producer. Losing the showrunner is closer to losing the director of a film halfway through the shoot. Losing Clyde Phillips specifically meant losing the person who understood Dexter Morgan most deeply. Phillips had spent 4 years inside that character's head. He knew what the show was about at a structural level that no replacement could absorb quickly. He knew where the contradictions in the premise lived, knew which ones to lean into for dramatic effect, and which ones to paper over carefully. He knew the code of Harry well enough to know its limits. He knew what Dexter's relationships with Deborah, Rita, and the Miami Metro crew were supposed to be doing thematically. He knew, most importantly, how the show was supposed to end. He revealed that intended ending in September 2013, right after the actual series finale aired, in an interview where he made clear he had never shared it publicly before. His version of the final scene. Dexter wakes up, and for a moment it seems like a dream. Then the camera pulls back slowly and reveals he is strapped to an execution table at a Florida prison. The lethal injection has already begun. As he dies, he looks through the window into the observation gallery. and every person he killed, or whose death he was responsible for, is watching him. The Trinity Killer, the ice truck killer who was his brother, Sergeant Dokes, Maria LaGuerta, Rita, Lila. Every major death across 8 seasons, all of them present for his last seconds. The entire series would have been revealed as the life flashing before a condemned man's eyes in the seconds between the injection beginning and his heart stopping. Phillips said this idea was inspired by a short story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, written by Ambrose Bierce in 1890. In that story, a man being hanged imagines an elaborate escape in the split second between the rope snapping tight and his neck breaking. The whole story happens inside those 2 or 3 seconds of dying. Phillips wanted the whole of Dexter to function the same way, a final flash of consciousness, playing back a life of violence in the moment of the justice that life had always been heading toward. That ending would have done something the actual finale completely failed to do. It would have confirmed that the show understood Dexter was a killer, not a hero. It would have given every victim a witness presence in the final scene. It would have closed the moral account that 8 seasons of murder had opened. And it would have done all of this with a structural elegance. The entire series reframed in the last 60 seconds. That would have made Dexter one of the most discussed finales in television history, the way the endings of Breaking Bad and The Sopranos are still discussed. Instead, Season 5 began with a new showrunner who had inherited a creative problem he had not designed and did not fully understand. The problems in Season 5 are real and well documented. The season introduces Lumen, played by Julia Stiles, a woman who survived a series of violent men and finds in Dexter a partner for her own need to kill the people who hurt her. There is genuine emotional material in this premise. 2 people who have both been broken in specific ways, finding an understanding in each other that they cannot find anywhere else. For stretches of Season 5, this works. Then Lumen leaves at the end of the season. She tells Dexter that her darkness is gone, that the need she felt has passed now that the men who hurt her are dead, and she walks away from Miami. She is never mentioned again in any meaningful way in the subsequent 3 seasons. The story she and Dexter shared, the specific emotional understanding they developed, vanishes as completely as if it never happened. This is the first clear example of what would become the defining creative habit of the post-Phillips era. Introduce a major emotional relationship, use it to drive a season, then discard it without consequence when the season ends. The show was supposed to be building towards something. Under Phillips, each season felt like a chapter in a larger book. After Phillips, each season felt more like a standalone story that happened to feature the same main character. Quinn, a detective who spends much of Season 5 genuinely investigating whether Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher, following up on the question Dokes died asking, has his investigation dropped without payoff. He gets close enough that the audience feels the tension of potential exposure. Then the thread is simply dropped. Quinn stops investigating. The show moves on. The question Dokes gave his life over gets buried a second time. This time not through murder, but through the writers deciding it was too inconvenient to follow through on. Phillips watched all of this from the outside. He had stayed on as a consultant for the early part of Season 5, but by his own account, his involvement ended within the first few episodes. After that, he watched every Sunday night and called a producer friend after each episode. He described the post-Season 4 period in plain terms. The show went off the rails. The character was untethered. What he meant by untethered is important. Dexter Morgan worked as a character because Phillips understood that the code of Harry was both Dexter's operating system and his prison. Every choice Dexter made was in relationship to the code, following it, bending it, feeling the weight of it, questioning it. That relationship gave the character internal tension, even in episodes where the external plot was relatively simple. You were always watching someone navigate a set of rules they did not choose and could not fully escape. After Phillips left, the code becomes more like a backdrop than an active force in the story. It is referenced but not truly tested. Dexter bends it, and the show does not fully explore what that bending means. The internal tension that made the character work in the early seasons gets replaced by external drama. New villains, new love interests, new professional crises. And the character at the center of it all starts to feel like he is reacting to events rather than being shaped by them. The departure also removed the person who had a specific, settled answer for where Dexter was going. Everyone who followed Phillips was working without a map. They knew the show's premise, its characters, its world. They did not know what the end was supposed to look like, or what path led there. So they made it up season by season, which produced exactly what you would expect from a television drama being written without a destination. Seasons that work in isolation, but do not build toward anything. Character decisions that make sense within an episode, but do not connect to any larger movement. And a finale that had no idea what it was supposed to conclude, because nobody had ever agreed on what the show was trying to say. The tragedy of Clyde Phillips leaving after season 4 is not just that the show got worse afterward, though it did. The deeper tragedy is timing. He left at the exact moment when staying would have mattered most. Season 4 ends with Rita murdered in a bathtub, Dexter standing in his baby son's blood. The whole safe life he had been building destroyed in a single scene. That is a genuine moment of reckoning. The show had just done the most consequential thing it had ever done, had just raised the emotional stakes higher than they had ever been, had just created a situation where the next step genuinely mattered. And the person who knew what that next step should be got in his car, drove home from the viewing party with complicated feelings, and did not come back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What happened to the story after that departure? What happened to Rita, to her children, to the consequences that should have reshaped everything? Is its own case study in how quickly a show can squander the weight it spent years building. Because the season 4 finale was not just a shocking death. Rita's murder was supposed to mean something permanent. What the show did instead is one of the clearest examples of how Dexter learned to make big moves and then immediately walk them back. Section 4. Rita's death. Fridging the show's moral center. Rita Morgan spent 4 seasons being one of the most important people in Dexter's world, and the show spent almost none of that time treating her like it knew that. She was played by Julie Benz. She was a mother of 2 children from a previous marriage, Astor and Cody, and she and Dexter eventually had a son together named Harrison. She was a domestic abuse survivor. Her ex-husband Paul had been violent with her, and the damage from that marriage was something she carried visibly through the early seasons. Something the show used to explain why she moved slowly in her relationship with Dexter, why she was careful, why she did not push too hard on the parts of him that did not quite add up. She was kind in a way that read as genuine rather than decorative. She believed in people. She believed in Dexter specifically, in a version of him that was real enough to her that she built a life around it. For 4 seasons, she was Dexter's anchor to the world of normal human experience. Every scene she appeared in was a scene about what Dexter was pretending to be. And every time she looked at him with trust and warmth, the audience felt the specific wrongness of someone giving that much love to someone who, at his core, was something she had no framework to understand. That tension between what Rita believed and what the audience knew was doing genuine dramatic work. It was not the most complex work the show did, but it was steady, and it mattered. The season 4 finale killed her. Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity killer, found Dexter's home address and went there. Rita returned home to pick up her passport before leaving for her honeymoon with Dexter. She came back alone, without the children. Mitchell was there. He killed her in the bathtub, in the same pattern he used for all his female victims, and left Harrison, the baby, sitting on the bathroom floor in a pool of his mother's blood, mirroring almost exactly the scene from Dexter's own childhood when he watched his mother killed and sat in her blood for 2 days before anyone found him. Dexter discovered this in the final minutes of the finale. He had just killed Trinity. He thought it was over. He came home to start the rest of his life and found his wife dead and his infant son on the floor. The scene is genuinely brutal. Beautifully shot, performed with real weight by Michael C. Hall, and structured to land with maximum impact after an entire season of building toward what felt like a possible future for Dexter. Critics praised it. Audiences were shattered by it. The finale drew 2.6 million viewers and was treated as one of the great season-ending moments of the show's run. And then season 5 began, and the show revealed that it had no idea what to do with what it had just done. The death of Rita falls into a long pattern in film and television that has a specific name: fridging. The term comes from a comic book trope, but it spread because the pattern it describes is everywhere. A female character with her own history, her own arc, her own established relationships, gets killed not to serve her story, but to change the male main character's emotional direction. Her death is not a conclusion to her narrative. Her death is a tool for his. She is removed from the story so that he can feel something, change something, or be pushed somewhere new. Her 4 seasons of development, her survival of abuse, her trust, her love, her children, all of it is cashed in as fuel for his journey forward. Rita's death is a textbook example of this. She does not die because her story required it. She dies because the writers, including Clyde Phillips himself, decided they needed to do more than just kill Trinity. They needed to raise the stakes in a way that would permanently mark Dexter, that would strip away the domestic stability he had been building and push him into darker, more isolated territory. Rita was the stability. To remove the stability, they removed Rita. Phillips said this plainly after he left the show. The story evolved, and it became inevitable, he said. They knew they had to do more than kill Trinity. That reasoning is honest, and it explains the decision clearly. What it also reveals is that Rita's death was decided based on what Dexter needed, not based on anything Rita's character had been building toward. She is murdered because the protagonist's story required a major loss, and she was the most convenient major loss available. What followed made the problem worse. Season 5 begins roughly 6 months after Rita's death. Dexter is grieving, in the limited, fractured way that Dexter grieves anything. Astor and Cody, Rita's children, who Dexter had been raising as a stepfather, are sent to live with their grandparents in Orlando almost immediately. They make a small number of appearances in Season 5 and then essentially disappear from the show entirely. By Seasons 6, 7, and 8, they are referenced barely at all. 2 children who had been present for 4 seasons, who loved Dexter, who called him Dad, who lost their mother in a violent and traumatic way. Written out of the story within the first few episodes of the season following that death. Then forgotten. This is not a minor creative choice. Aster and Cody are human beings within the world of the show who experienced something devastating. Their absence from the story after Rita's death is the show admitting that it killed Rita for the impact of the killing itself, not for any of the ripple effects that would realistically follow. If the show had genuinely cared about what Rita's death meant, not just as a plot device, but as an event with human weight, Aster and Cody would have been part of how that weight played out. They were not. They were removed from the story at the same time Rita was, because they were part of the same package. Rita and her family existed to give Dexter a normal life, and once the decision was made to take that normal life away, all of it went together. Harrison, the baby, is handled differently, because Harrison is Dexter's biological child, and therefore carries a different kind of narrative weight. He cannot be shipped off to grandparents and forgotten. He stays. But in the seasons that follow, Harrison is less a character with interiority than a symbol, a reminder of what Dexter is risking, a reason to feel something, a small human presence that makes Dexter's double life feel more complicated. He does not speak or think or have meaningful experiences of his own within the show's focus. He is furniture that the show treats as a character. The season that follows Rita's death, Season 5, introduces Lumen, a survivor of prolonged abuse who connects with Dexter over their shared capacity for violence. The show clearly intends this relationship to be the emotional replacement for what Rita provided. A person who grounds Dexter in something human, who gives his kills a context beyond pure compulsion. The critical difference is that where Rita represented Dexter's relationship with normalcy, Lumen represents his relationship with darkness. She does not humanize him by showing him what an ordinary life could look like. She humanizes him by showing him that his specific brand of damage can be understood and even shared. This is a meaningful shift, and in isolation, it is an interesting creative choice. The problem is what happens at the end of Season 5. Lumen tells Dexter her darkness is gone, and she leaves. Just like that. The emotional architecture of the entire season, Dexter finding someone who sees him clearly and connects with him honestly, is dismantled in the final episode. She goes, he stays. The season has occurred, and at its end, almost nothing has changed in any lasting way. This is what Rita's death actually cost the show. Not the emotional impact of the murder itself, which was real. The cost was in the trajectory it set. By choosing to kill Rita as a reset, rather than as a genuine turning point, the show established that major events, even devastating, permanent ones like the murder of the main character's wife, do not have to produce lasting change. The story can absorb them and return to something close to baseline. The show learned from Rita's death that it could make a huge move and then spend the next season walking back to a position not far from where it started. Once that lesson is absorbed into a show's creative habits, it is very hard to unlearn. Every subsequent season of Dexter carries that habit. Big things happen. Characters die. Relationships are destroyed. And then the show finds a way to the next season without fully reckoning with what just happened. Quinn's investigation into Dexter is dropped. Lumen leaves without consequence. The children disappear. The habit of the reset, established through how the show handled Rita's death and its aftermath, becomes the dominant creative pattern of the show's final 4 seasons. There is another dimension to Rita's death that the show never addresses directly, but that sits underneath everything that follows. Rita was, in a specific and arguable sense, one of Dexter's victims. Not because he killed her, he did not, but because his choices put her in the path of someone who did. Trinity came to his home. Trinity killed his wife. If Dexter had not been living the double life that brought Trinity into his world, Rita would be alive. His children would have a mother. His son would not have spent the first hours of his life sitting on a blood-soaked floor. The show gestures at this occasionally. Dexter feels responsible. His internal monologue acknowledges the connection. But the show never truly pushes this guilt toward the place it logically leads, toward a genuine acknowledgement that the people who love Dexter are not safe because of him. That his presence in someone's life is not a mixed blessing, but an active danger. The closest the show comes to this acknowledgement is a throwaway line in the later seasons, and even that is processed quickly and moved past. Rita deserved more than the show gave her, not just in the manner of her death, but in the years before it. She spent 4 seasons being used as evidence as Dexter's capacity to pass as human, rather than as a fully realized person who mattered on her own terms. Her death confirmed that the show saw her the same way. She was the most significant person in Dexter's normal life, and the show treated her significance entirely in terms of what her presence meant for him and what her absence would produce in him. That reduction of a woman with a history, a trauma, children, and a genuine emotional life down to a function in someone else's story is the show's clearest moral failure outside of the central premise itself. And it echoes through every female character who comes after her, each of them orbiting Dexter's story rather than occupying their own. Rita's death made Season 4 unforgettable. The handling of that death made the seasons that followed smaller and more dishonest than they needed to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the season that arrived 2 years later, Season 6, produced the 2 most criticized creative decisions in the show's entire run. One of them was a twist so poorly constructed that most viewers solved it weeks before the show revealed it. The other was a development so jarring, so unmotivated, and so damaging to one of the show's most important relationships that it is still discussed as an example of writers running out of ideas and reaching for shock instead. Section 5, Season 5. The narrative reset that proved the show had no endgame. The Season 4 finale of Dexter ends with a baby on a blood-soaked bathroom floor. That image is not subtle. The show is drawing a direct line between what happened to Dexter as a child, watching his mother murdered, sitting in her blood for 2 days before anyone found him, and what is now happening to his son. Harrison has not seen his mother killed. He is too young to understand anything. But he is there, in the blood, in the same position, and the show frames it deliberately so the audience cannot miss the connection. The cycle has continued. The thing Dexter has spent his whole life carrying, the original wound that made him what he is, has now been passed forward to the next generation. This is an extraordinary place to leave a story. The implications are genuinely staggering. Dexter's double life has produced the exact trauma in his own child that produced him. The code of Harry, designed to contain the damage, has instead spread it. Everything Dexter thought he was managing, the violence, the darkness, the cost, has escaped the container he built for it and landed on the person he was most trying to protect. If the show had committed to that, Season 5 could have been the most devastating and honest season of television Dexter ever produced. The story was right there. A man confronting the fact that his choices have shaped his son's earliest experience of the world in the worst possible way. A man who spent years telling himself the code kept the damage contained, now holding proof in his arms that the code was never enough. Season 5 does not do this. What Season 5 does instead is introduce a new character, process the grief in a contained and relatively brief way, run a new seasonal villain plot, and end in almost exactly the same emotional position the show was in before Rita died. Not literally the same. Rita is gone, the children are gone, the specific shape of Dexter's life has changed, but the fundamental dynamic, the engine of the show, the moral and emotional situation of the main character, largely unchanged. Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles, arrives as the emotional center of Season 5. She is a woman who was kidnapped and repeatedly assaulted by a group of men who filmed their crimes and who have done this to multiple women. She survives. She finds Dexter. She discovers what he is. And rather than turning him in or running from him, she asks him to help her kill the men who hurt her. There is real material in this premise. Lumen is not looking for justice in any conventional sense. She wants the specific men who destroyed her life removed from the world. And she wants to be present when it happens. She wants the agency that was taken from her. She wants to be the one holding the knife. Dexter understands this in a way that no one else in her life possibly could, and the show uses their partnership to explore what it means for two people to share something that cannot be spoken about anywhere else. For stretches of Season 5, this works. The scenes between Hall and Stiles have genuine electricity. The central idea, that Dexter's darkness, which has always isolated him, is in this specific context the thing that makes him the most useful person in someone's life, is the most interesting variation on the show's premise since the early seasons. Lumen does not love Dexter despite what he is. She needs him because of it. Then the season ends. Lumen tells Dexter that her darkness is gone. The men who hurt her are dead. The need she felt, the burning, specific need to kill that had overtaken her life, has passed. She is ready to try to be a normal person again. She thanks him and she leaves Miami. The relationship, the partnership, the specific emotional understanding they built across 10 episodes, over. She is never mentioned again in any meaningful way. This is the moment that reveals the post-Phillips era's central creative problem with complete clarity. Lumen's departure is not earned. The show tells you her darkness is gone, but it does not show you why that transformation is permanent or believable. People who survive the kind of trauma Lumen survived do not typically find that the desire for justice, or revenge, or whatever name you give to what she was feeling, simply evaporates once the immediate targets are gone. The show needed Lumen to leave because it needed to reset, and it constructed whatever emotional justification would get her out the door cleanly. More revealing than her departure is the silence that follows it. 3 more seasons of Dexter air after Season 5. In those seasons, Dexter experiences new relationships, new losses, new threats, new moments of apparent emotional growth. Lumen is not part of any of it. The woman who understood Dexter more completely than almost anyone except his sister, who participated in his kills, who saw his ritual, who chose to be beside him in the darkest possible version of what he does, is treated by the subsequent seasons as though she never existed. Compare this to how Breaking Bad handled its major relationship losses, or how The Sopranos returned again and again to past events and characters as Tony Soprano's history accumulated weight. Those shows understood that the past does not go away. People who mattered to the main character continue to matter, continue to shape his decisions, continue to exist in his psychology, even when they are no longer physically present in the story. Dexter operates as though the past can be filed away and forgotten when a new season begins. The Quinn investigation follows the same pattern with the same result. Detective Joey Quinn spends significant portions of Season 5 genuinely suspicious of Dexter. He hires a private investigator named Liddy to follow him. Liddy gets close enough to photograph Dexter and Lumen together on the boat, conducting what is clearly not a recreational evening on the water. This is the closest anyone gets to catching Dexter in the act since Dokes, and it has the potential to be genuinely threatening. Then Dexter kills Liddy. Quinn is present at the scene under circumstances that make him look suspicious. Dexter plants Quinn's blood on the scene in a way that redirects the investigation toward Quinn himself. Quinn is investigated, cleared, and by the end of the season has moved on from his suspicion of Dexter almost entirely. He and Dexter reach a kind of unspoken equilibrium. Quinn knows something is wrong with Dexter, but cannot prove it, and the active investigation simply stops. This is Dokes all over again, run at a lower temperature. Someone with legitimate suspicion gets close, circumstances conspire to redirect the threat, and the show returns to baseline. The difference is that Dokes died for getting close. Quinn survives, but his survival requires him to stop doing what Dokes was doing, which is the same functional result. The investigation ends. The question goes unanswered. The show moves on. By the time Season 5 concludes, the pattern is fully established. Major events occur. Emotional weight accumulates. And then the show finds the reset button and presses it, so that Season 6 can begin from something close to the same position as Season 5 began, which was already close to the position Season 4 began, which was already close to the position Season 3 began. Each season shuffles the specific furniture around. New villain, new love interest, new professional complication. But the room itself never fundamentally changes. This is the structural evidence that the show had no endgame. A show with a genuine destination does not reset this consistently, because resets cost you distance toward that destination. Every time Dexter returns to baseline, every time a relationship or investigation that threatened to truly change things is dissolved, the show is spending time without going anywhere. The audience feels this even when they cannot name it. After Season 4, reviews increasingly describe Dexter with words like repetitive and circular. Fans on forums note that the show keeps doing the same thing. Critics who loved the early seasons start hedging. What they are all responding to is the absence of forward momentum. The show is moving. New episodes, new plots, new characters. But it is not going anywhere. The wheels are spinning. The absence of a plan is almost impossible to hide across a long-running drama. Individual episodes can be strong. Individual seasons can have moments of genuine quality. But without a destination, the cumulative effect of watching many seasons is the feeling of having walked a long distance in a large circle. The scenery changes. The effort is real. The distance covered is zero. Clyde Phillips, from the outside, watched this happen in real time. He called his producer after each episode. He watched the character become untethered, his word, from the specific internal logic that had made Dexter interesting in the early seasons. The code of Harry, which under Phillips had been an active force shaping almost every decision the character made, receded into the background. Dexter made choices the early season version of himself would not have made. Not because the character was growing, but because the writers needed him to be somewhere new, and the code was getting in the way. The version of Dexter in Season 5 and beyond is a man without a real architect. The rules that governed him have loosened. The relationships that anchored him keep getting replaced rather than developed. The threats that should change him keep being neutralized before they can. He is the same man at the end of Season 5 that he was at the beginning of it, which means Rita died, and Lumen came and went, and Quinn investigated and backed off, and Harrison grew from a newborn into a toddler, and Dexter Morgan at his core, is exactly where he started. That is not a character in a story. That is a premise being maintained. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And 2 seasons later, the show would make 2 specific creative decisions in one season that would confirm, beyond any remaining doubt, that the writers had genuinely run out of road. One of those decisions involved a villain whose big twist the audience had already figured out weeks in advance. The other involved a relationship so jarring and so unmotivated that it damaged something the show had spent 6 years carefully building. Section 6, Season 6, the twist everyone saw coming, and the incest nobody asked for. Season 6 of Dexter had 2 jobs. The first job was to introduce a villain compelling enough to follow John Lithgow's Trinity Killer. The performance that won a Golden Globe set the standard for what a Dexter antagonist could be, and left the show with an expectations problem it had never fully dealt with. The second job was to do something meaningful with the relationship between Dexter and his sister Deborah, which had been the emotional backbone of the show since the pilot, and which, by Season 6, was overdue for a genuine shift. The show failed at both jobs. Not partially. Not in ways that could be defended with the right framing. Completely. And in ways that critics and audiences documented in real time and have continued to document in the years since. The villain of Season 6 is presented as 2 people working together. Professor James Geller, played by Edward James Olmos, is a former religious studies professor who has gone off the deep end and become obsessed with the Book of Revelation, the final book of the Bible, which describes the end of the world in vivid and violent detail. His former student, Travis Marshall, played by Colin Hanks, is carrying out a series of murders designed to mirror the apocalyptic imagery from that book. Together, they are called the Doomsday Killer. On paper, the casting alone should have generated excitement. Edward James Olmos is a genuinely formidable actor with decades of work behind him. Colin Hanks had shown real capability in earlier roles. A religious apocalypse storyline connected to one of the most dramatic texts in Western history had obvious potential for visually striking television. The season had the ingredients for something memorable. What it produced instead was one of the most criticized seasons in the show's run, built around a twist so poorly constructed that a significant portion of the audience identified it within the first few episodes, long before the show intended to reveal it. The twist is this: Professor Geller is not real. He does not exist as a living person in the events of Season 6. He is a figment of Travis Marshall's imagination, a projection of a man Travis killed years earlier, now living inside his head as a voice that drives him toward violence. Travis is the Doomsday Killer. He has been the Doomsday Killer the entire time. Geller is his dark passenger, the same way Harry Morgan functions as Dexter's internal voice. The reveal happens in Season 6, Episode 9, titled Get Geller. Dexter tracks the professor to a church, finds a freezer, opens it, and discovers Geller's frozen body inside. Geller has been dead for years. Everything the audience watched him do across 8 episodes, every conversation with Travis, every plan laid out, every scene of the 2 of them together, was happening inside Travis Marshall's mind. This type of twist has worked in other stories. Fight Club built an entire film around a version of it, and executed the construction so carefully that rewatching reveals dozens of hidden clues that feel rewarding rather than cheap. The Sixth Sense used a similar principle and became one of the most discussed films of its decade. The difference in both cases is that the construction was airtight. Every scene involving the character who turns out not to be real was filmed and written so that a viewer going back after the reveal could see exactly how they were being guided without being cheated. The clues were there. The rules were consistent. The twist recontextualized everything rather than simply negating it. Season 6 of Dexter does not achieve this. The visual clues that Geller is not real are present from the beginning, and they are not subtle. Geller never speaks to or makes eye contact with anyone except Travis. When Travis is in public locations with Geller, sitting in a restaurant together, walking through a crowd, other people simply do not acknowledge Geller's presence. A waitress takes Travis's order and does not look at or address the man sitting across from him. In a scene where Geller brands his own arm with hot metal, he shows no physical reaction to what should be an extraordinarily painful experience. In every scene where violence is actually carried out, Geller watches from a distance while Travis does the physical work. These are not carefully hidden clues. They are visible to any attentive viewer in the first handful of episodes. Multiple critics and audiences identified what was happening in online discussions weeks before the reveal aired. The Ravenous Monster review of the season called the twist's reliance on an unreliable narrator an unforgivable sin in storytelling, specifically because the construction was not tight enough to make the revelation feel earned. Screen Rant's analysis noted that the twist was widely seen as predictable and unconvincing, and that the decision to drag the setup across most of a 12-episode season made the eventual payoff feel even more deflating. The structural problem is that a twist only works if the audience does not see it coming before the story is ready to show it. Once the audience has figured it out and is simply waiting for the show to catch up, the dramatic engine of that storyline dies. Every subsequent scene involving Geller stops being suspenseful and becomes an exercise in patience, watching the show slowly arrive at a conclusion the viewer reached 3 episodes ago. That dead engine has to carry 8 full episodes of a 12-episode season, which means more than half of Season 6's central plot is running on empty. Olmos, by every critical account, is wasted. A reviewer for Ravenous Monster described watching an actor of his caliber being forced to play a character written as flatly and one-dimensionally as Geller as almost criminal. The show took one of the most commanding screen presences available to it and gave him a role that required him to play one note, sinister religious authority, for 8 episodes, then revealed the character was never real to begin with. Whatever performance Olmos might have built across a full season with genuine material to work with never existed. He was playing a ghost the entire time, without the construction being careful enough to make that ghost worth the 8 episodes invested in him. Colin Hanks is treated more fairly by the critics. Most accounts note that he gives a capable performance within the limits of what the writing gives him. The problem is not his performance. Travis Marshall on the page is not a character with sufficient depth to function as a season-long primary antagonist. He does not have the internal life that made Trinity genuinely disturbing. Trinity was frightening because of the gap between his public face and his private reality. Because the show spent time inside his family, showing you what the performance of normalcy was costing everyone around him. Travis Marshall does not have that layer. He is damaged and driven by delusion, but the show does not give him enough history or enough specific humanity to make his damage feel like anything more than a plot mechanism. The religious theme of the season, the apocalyptic imagery, the Book of Revelation, the elaborate murder tableau, is visually ambitious but thematically thin. The show wanted to use Travis's obsession with the end of the world as a mirror for Dexter's own relationship with darkness and belief. There is a subplot where Dexter encounters a reformed ex-convict named Brother Sam, played by Mos Def, who has found genuine faith and whose relationship with Dexter raises real questions about whether Dexter is capable of something like spiritual life. Critics and audiences responded well to Brother Sam specifically. His performance is noted as one of the genuine bright spots of the season. But Brother Sam is killed mid-season, removing the one character whose presence was doing something interesting with the religious theme, and the season proceeds without anything to replace the specific quality he brought. The religious framework connecting Travis's apocalyptic murders to Dexter's own dark passenger never lands with the force the show intends. The season ends without having said anything specific or earned about faith, darkness, belief, or the end of things. The theme was window dressing around a twist that did not work. The second major failure of Season 6 is both simpler and more damaging to the show's long-term foundation. Deborah Morgan falls in love with Dexter. Jennifer Carpenter had played Deborah for 6 seasons as Dexter's adopted sister, his most important human relationship, the person whose approval he seeks more than anyone else's, the emotional anchor of a man who spends most of his internal life disconnected from everyone around him. The sibling bond between Dexter and Deborah is not the most glamorous element of the show, but it is arguably the most load-bearing one. It is the relationship the show returns to when everything else is in flux. It is the one connection that feels genuinely mutual. Deborah loves Dexter without reservation or agenda, and Dexter, in his fractured and limited way, loves her back. In Season 6, Deborah begins therapy following a difficult period professionally and personally. Her therapist, over the course of their sessions, helps Deborah recognize that her romantic feelings toward Dexter go beyond what a sibling relationship normally contains. The season ends with Deborah realizing she is in love with him, romantically, not just as a brother. The reaction from critics and audiences was immediate and almost uniformly negative. The specific criticism is not simply that the development is uncomfortable, though it is. The specific criticism is that it is unmotivated. 6 full seasons of the show had aired before this moment. 6 seasons in which Deborah and Dexter's relationship had been built with care and specificity. As siblings, as colleagues, as 2 damaged people who find in each other the closest thing either of them has to unconditional belonging. Nothing across those 6 seasons planted or suggested the development that Season 6 suddenly introduces. There is no moment in Season 1 through 5 that a viewer could point to and say, "That was the seed of this." The show did not lay groundwork for it. It arrived without preparation, driven by what the writers apparently believed would be a shocking and unexpected turn. Shock without groundwork is just confusion with extra steps. The development damaged the sibling relationship retroactively, without adding anything to replace what it damaged. Deborah's love for Dexter had been moving and straightforward precisely because it was uncomplicated by romantic feeling. It was the clearest and most human thing in a show full of moral murk. Making it romantic did not deepen it. It confused it, muddied the 6 seasons of emotional history that preceded it, and gave the audience a reason to feel uncomfortable watching scenes that had previously felt like the show's most genuine emotional territory. Rotten Tomatoes user reviews from Season 6 record the audience's response in real time. Multiple reviewers describe the incest development as the moment the show lost them. Others describe fast-forwarding through Deborah's scenes entirely. The Screen Rant analysis of the season identifies it as one of the primary reasons Season 6 felt disconnected from the rest of the series. A development that, in their words, severely throws off the integrity of the story and adds nothing whatsoever to the show. Season 6 ends with one genuinely strong moment. After spending the entire season almost discovering Dexter's secret, Deborah finally walks in on him in the act. Standing over Travis Marshall's body on a kill table, in full ritual, unmistakable. She sees what her brother is. The season ends there, on that image, on her face. That ending is the most dramatically promising moment Season 6 produces. The thing the show had been building towards since the pilot, Deborah finding out, finally happens. 6 seasons in, the person who matters most to Dexter knows the truth. What the show does with that truth in Season 7 is a separate conversation. What matters about Season 6 is what it revealed about the show's creative state by the time it aired. The season demonstrates a writing room reaching for impact, without doing the construction work that makes impact meaningful. A twist that requires the audience not to notice things that are plainly visible. A character development that requires the audience to forget 6 seasons of established relationship history. A thematic framework that looks ambitious on the surface and collapses when examined closely. These are not the failures of a show that knows where it is going and made a few wrong turns. These are the failures of a show that has genuinely lost the thread and is trying different things to find it again. The thread, of course, was never just the plot. The thread was the question the show had been asking since its first episode. Whether Dexter could keep doing what he does forever, without the world catching up to him. Season 6 stopped asking that question clearly enough to answer it. Season 7 picked it back up with more focus. But the damage to the show's credibility had accumulated to a point where even the stronger seasons that followed could not fully undo it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because the strongest antagonist the show ever had was not a religious fanatic, or a brain surgeon, or a shadowy organization. The strongest antagonist was always the same one. The person, or thing, that would finally make Dexter face what he had done and who he was. After the Trinity Killer, the show kept searching for that antagonist and kept falling short. The reason it kept falling short is the most honest and least flattering truth about what Dexter was, and what it had always been doing with the characters it put up against its main character. Section 7. The Antagonist Problem. No one after Trinity could fill the room. John Lithgow won a Golden Globe for playing Arthur Mitchell. Not a nomination, a win. At the 67th Golden Globe Awards in January 2010, Lithgow took home the award for Best Supporting Actor in a series, miniseries, or television film for his portrayal of the Trinity Killer in Season 4 of Dexter. Michael C. Hall won Best Actor in a drama series at the same ceremony. It was the only time in the show's entire run that it swept both lead and supporting acting categories at a major awards show. And it happened because Season 4 produced something that the television landscape had genuinely not seen before. A villain whose horror lived not in what he did to strangers, but in what he did to the people who called him family. Arthur Mitchell kills in a pattern. 3 victims in a specific sequence, repeated over decades across multiple cities. That pattern is what earns him the Trinity Killer label from the press. But the pattern, as disturbing as its ritual precision is not what makes him the most effective villain in the show's history. What makes him unforgettable is his home life. Mitchell presents to the world as a pillar of his community. He organizes volunteers to build homes for people who cannot afford them. He leads a church group. He is a grandfather. He has a wife named Sally, and a son named Jonah, and a daughter named Rebecca. And to everyone outside that house, the Mitchells are a model American family. Inside the house is something different entirely. Sally flinches when Arthur moves too quickly. The children navigate their father the way you navigate an unpredictable animal. Carefully, without sudden movements, always watching. The family dinners Dexter witnesses in the Mitchell home are exercises in controlled terror. Everyone performing normalcy around a man whose rage is always one wrong word away from becoming something physical. Lithgow plays all of this simultaneously. The warmth he radiates in public is complete enough to be genuinely convincing. You can see why people trust Arthur Mitchell, why they follow him, why the community respects him. And in the private scenes, in the home, the warmth is gone, and what replaces it is something cold and precise and patient. He is not chaotic. He is not wild. He has been doing this for decades, and he knows exactly how much pressure to apply, and exactly when to ease off. He has refined the performance of decency into something indistinguishable from the real thing, and he has refined the reality of his cruelty into something sustainable enough to maintain indefinitely. The show contrasts him with Dexter deliberately throughout Season 4. Mitchell has a wife and children, and a community role, and a secret darkness running beneath all of it. Dexter has a wife and children, and a professional role, and a secret darkness running beneath all of it. The parallel is not subtle. The show wants you to see Arthur Mitchell as a dark mirror, the version of Dexter's life that continues without correction, without the code, without any of the moral filters Harry installed. Mitchell is what happens when the darkness wins completely, and the performance of normalcy becomes the only thing left. This parallel works because Lithgow makes Mitchell specific. Every choice he makes as a performer, the precise way Mitchell's voice changes register when he shifts from public face to private reality, the particular stillness he holds in moments of barely contained rage, the specific quality of his smile in scenes where he is performing warmth he does not feel, builds a character with genuine interior weight. You believe in Arthur Mitchell as a person who has lived this double life for decades, who has made peace with what he is in the most chilling possible way. He is not struggling with his darkness. He has incorporated it. No villain the show produces after him achieves anything close to this. Jordan Chase in Season 5 is the closest attempt. He is the leader of a self-help movement, a man who built a public career out of telling people to take what they want from life, while privately orchestrating the worst possible version of that philosophy with a group of like-minded men. The concept is strong, a predator who hides behind the language of personal empowerment. Johnny Lee Miller, who plays him, is a capable actor. But Chase never develops the specific interior life that Lithgow built into Mitchell. He functions as a plot mechanism more than a person. His menace is stated rather than felt. By the time he is killed in the Season 5 finale, the audience has understood what he represents without ever quite believing in him as someone who actually exists. Colin Hanks as Travis Marshall in Season 6 has already been covered. A performer working genuinely hard inside a role the writing never gave enough depth to sustain as a primary antagonist across 12 episodes. Compounded by a twist construction that robbed the season of its suspense before the reveal arrived. The Doomsday Killer storyline also squanders Edward James Olmos, which requires a moment of specific attention because it is one of the most frustrating casting decisions the show ever made. Olmos is an actor whose screen presence alone generates authority. His work across decades of television and film includes performances of considerable power and range. The show hires him, gives him a character that requires him to play a single quality: intense, unwavering religious fanaticism, for 8 episodes, and then reveals that the character was never real to begin with. Olmos never gets a scene that allows him to do anything other than the one thing the writing asks of him repeatedly. The potential sitting inside that casting decision, the version of Season 6 where Geller is a genuinely complex and living antagonist who challenges Dexter in ways that go beyond the plot. That version does not exist. What exists is a ghost played by a man who deserved better material. Season 7 does something more interesting with its antagonist. Isaac Serko, played by Ray Stevenson, is a Ukrainian organized crime figure who comes to Miami specifically to find and kill Dexter, because Dexter killed someone he loved. Serko is not a serial killer. He is not someone Dexter hunts. He is someone hunting Dexter. And the dynamic reversal gives Season 7 an energy the 2 seasons before it lacked. Stevenson plays Serko with genuine intelligence and a specific kind of grief-driven patience that makes him feel like a real person rather than a plot obstacle. His scenes with Dexter are the best antagonist scenes the show produces after Trinity. Serko is killed mid-season. This is the decision that defines Season 7's relationship with its own best material. The most compelling antagonist the show has introduced since Trinity is removed from the story at the halfway point of the season, replaced by a plot involving Hannah McKay, a woman who poisons people and whom Dexter begins a romantic relationship with, and the LaGuerta investigation into Dexter's identity as the Bay Harbor Butcher. Both of these storylines have merit. The LaGuerta thread in particular is one of the more interesting things the show does in its final 2 seasons. But removing Serko at the midpoint of the season in which he appears is the same creative habit the show demonstrated by killing brother Sam mid-season in Season 6. The show keeps discarding its best material before it has been fully used. Season 8 produces the weakest set of antagonists in the show's run. Oliver Saxon, also known as the brain surgeon, is a serial killer who removes portions of his victims' brains. He is the biological son of Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a psychiatrist introduced in Season 8 who is presented as the person who originally helped Harry Morgan develop the code that shaped Dexter's life. The concept of Vogel is interesting. The idea that Dexter's entire operating system was designed by someone other than Harry, someone who viewed him as a kind of experiment in controlled psychopathy. But the show does not develop it fully before moving on. Saxon himself is thin. He is presented as exceptionally dangerous, but his danger is asserted by the narrative rather than demonstrated through scenes that genuinely build dread. His motivations are established, but not explored with any depth. His relationship with Vogel is the most potentially rich element of his character. A son whose mother helped create a moral code for a man and not for him, which is its own form of devastating. But the show uses it primarily as plot mechanism rather than as character foundation. He is killed by Dexter in the series finale with a pen, in a room with police officers watching on security camera. The officers review the footage and determine it was self-defense. This is how the show's final primary antagonist exits the story. Not in a climactic confrontation that draws on 8 seasons of accumulated meaning. Not in a scene that forces Dexter to face something real about himself or his choices. With a pen, in a room, on camera. Cleared as self-defense by the same police department that should, by any honest reckoning, have caught Dexter years ago. The antagonist problem in Dexter is not simply a question of casting or writing quality in isolation. The deeper issue is structural, and it connects directly to the premise problem identified at the start. The show needs its antagonists to be threatening enough to generate genuine tension. The audience has to believe Dexter might actually be caught, or stopped, or destroyed. But the show also cannot allow its antagonists to succeed, because the moment they succeed, the premise ends. So every antagonist has to be threatening enough to sustain a season's worth of suspense, and then defeatable enough to be removed before the finale. Trinity got as close as any antagonist to breaking this structural constraint. He won, in a specific and terrible way. He killed Rita, which is something no villain before or after him managed to do, in terms of genuine, lasting consequence. But he still died. Dexter still killed him. The season still ended with Dexter standing, rather than Trinity. The constraint held, even in the best season the show produced. After Trinity, the constraint becomes increasingly visible precisely because no subsequent antagonist comes close to straining it. When the audience can feel that the villain of the season is going to be defeated, the tension that should power 12 episodes of drama deflates. The show tries to compensate through other means: relationship drama, professional complications, the LaGuardia investigation. But the seasonal villain engine, which had been one of the show's primary sources of momentum in the early seasons, runs quieter and quieter as the years pass. The Golden Globe that Lithgow won in January 2010 sits at the center of this problem. It confirmed what the show had achieved in Season 4. It also set a standard that the show's remaining 4 seasons and 1 revival would spend their entirety failing to reach. Every new villain introduced after Trinity was being measured against a performance and a character that represented the absolute peak of what the show could do with an antagonist. None of them measured up. The audience knew it. The critics knew it. Eventually, the comparison became part of the story of Dexter's decline. A show that found its ceiling in Season 4 and spent the following years proving it could not get back there. The irony is that the most effective antagonist Dexter ever had was never a guest character at all. The most effective antagonist was a question the show kept refusing to answer honestly: whether Dexter deserved to keep going, whether the code held up, whether the life he was living would eventually produce a cost he could not survive. That question, more than Trinity or Dokes or Saxon or anyone else, was the real engine of dramatic tension in the show's best seasons. When the show stopped asking that question clearly, when it reset instead of reckoned, when it neutralized instead of confronted, the tension went with it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And in Season 8, with the end finally in sight, the show made a series of choices so disconnected from what the audience needed and expected that the finale became something people do not reference as a disappointment, but as a warning, a shorthand. An example passed between television writers of exactly what not to do when a long story finally reaches its last page. Section 8. The series finale. Remember the Monsters? One of the most reviled in television history. The series finale of Dexter aired on September 22, 2013. It was the most watched episode in Showtime's history. Nielsen Media Research recorded approximately 2.8 million household viewers tuning in for the final hour of a show that had run for 8 seasons and 96 episodes. The number matters because it tells you something specific about the relationship between a show's cultural footprint and its creative state at the end. People watched the Dexter finale in enormous numbers, not because the final season had earned that viewership through quality, but because 8 years of investment in a story creates an obligation that most viewers honor, regardless of whether the show has recently deserved it. They watched because they had been there from the beginning. They watched because they wanted to see how it ended. What they saw sent them directly to their keyboards. The episode is titled, Remember the Monsters. The title comes from a scene early in the episode where Deborah recalls a memory from childhood. Dexter explaining to a young Deborah that the monsters she was afraid of in her bedroom were just shadows. There is genuine warmth in the reference, and the scene between Dexter and Deborah in the hospital that carries this memory is, by nearly universal critical agreement, the strongest material the finale produces. Jennifer Carpenter's performance in that scene received specific praise from multiple critics, including Mary McNamara of the Los Angeles Times, who called it worthy of an Emmy nomination, and described the sibling bond between Dexter and Deborah as possibly the most powerful such bond television has ever shown. That scene is not the finale's problem. The scene works. The problem is everything surrounding it. The season's villain, Oliver Saxon, also known as the brain surgeon, shot Deborah in the previous episode. The finale begins with her in the emergency room. The initial prognosis is cautious but not hopeless. Doctors tell Dexter and the people around her that none of her major organs were hit. There is reason to believe she will survive. The show uses this window of apparent hope to run its other plot threads. Dexter trying to get his son Harrison and Hannah McKay out of Miami ahead of a hurricane. A private detective named Elway pursuing Hannah through the airport. Saxon being processed through the justice system after his arrest. The airport sequence asks the audience to accept a series of events that strain any reasonable reading of how airports and law enforcement function. Dexter, trying to help Hannah escape, calls in a fake security threat, claiming he saw Elway leave a suspicious bag under a seat and walk away. Airport security detains Elway on this basis. The problem is that Dexter's false report also shuts down the terminal, which means the plane Hannah and Harrison were supposed to board cannot depart. The scheme designed to get his family out of the country instead prevents them from leaving. Meanwhile, Saxon, in custody at the police station, asks for a pen to fill out paperwork. He uses the pen to attack the officer watching him and escapes. He then walks to the hospital where Deborah is recovering. He shoots Deborah a second time during her surgery, causing a stroke that leaves her brain dead. He is then captured again at the hospital almost immediately after. At this point, the finale has produced the following sequence of events. A fake security alert shuts down an airport terminal. A captured serial killer escapes using a pin to attack a guard. That same killer walks into a hospital and shoots a patient in the middle of a medical procedure, and is then recaptured with minimal resistance. Den of Geek's review of the episode noted the problem directly. Saxon knocks out a man on a busy street with nobody reacting. Hannah sedates Elway on a crowded bus with nobody noticing. And Dexter later removes Deborah's body from the hospital through a busy parking lot without anyone stopping him. The show had always required some suspension of disbelief about how easily Dexter moved through the world without detection. 8 seasons of convenient blindness from the Miami Metro Police Department had established that the show was willing to ask for this. But the finale concentrates these requests into a single hour in a way that makes them impossible to ignore. The machinery of the plot is visible in every scene. Characters do what the script needs them to do, rather than what people in their situation would actually do. Saxon aims for Dexter's shoulder in a confrontation, despite being an experienced killer with a clear shot. Nobody on a crowded bus notices a woman being sedated beside them. The hospital staff apparently does not track who enters surgical areas during active procedures. These are not small details. In a finale, after 8 seasons, these details carry the full weight of everything the audience has invested. Every implausibility in a finale lands differently than the same implausibility in the 3rd episode of a 3rd season. The audience has come for something earned. Shortcuts feel like a betrayal. Dexter tracks Saxon to the hospital. He has already been told that Deborah is brain dead, that the stroke caused by Saxon's bullet has left her with no meaningful brain activity, that she will not recover. Rather than alerting the police or the doctors or anyone else to Saxon's presence in the hospital, Dexter finds him, captures him, and brings him to a private room. He has Saxon strapped to a surface. He holds a pen. In a moment, the show appears to intend as thematically resonant, a callback to the ritual he has performed across hundreds of kills. He drives the pen into Saxon's neck and kills him. A police camera in the room captures the whole thing. Dexter is taken in. Angel Batista and Joey Quinn review the footage. They conclude it was self-defense. No charges are filed. This is how the show disposes of its final villain. In a room, with a pen. Cleared by the same police department that has failed to catch Dexter for 8 years, now conveniently failing one final time in a way that costs the narrative nothing. The scene carries none of the ceremonial weight of previous kills. No plastic wrap, no photos of victims, no ritual dialogue, no sense of consequence. It is functional execution of a plot requirement. Dexter then goes to the hospital. Deborah is on life support, kept alive by machines. She is not going to recover. Dexter makes the decision himself, without consulting any doctor, without any apparent legal process, without any of the people who also love Deborah having any input, to remove her from life support. He disconnects the machines. She dies. He carries her body from the hospital, moves through the parking lot, puts her in his boat, and takes her out onto the ocean. A hurricane is approaching Miami. Dexter drives his boat directly into it. The Coast Guard later reports the boat destroyed, Dexter presumed dead. The final scene of the series reveals he is alive. He is living in Astoria, Oregon. He is working for a lumber company. He comes home from work to a small wood-framed house, sits down in the living room, and looks directly into the camera. The screen goes dark. The reaction was immediate, volcanic, and almost entirely negative. IMDb users gave the episode a 4.9 out of 10, one of the lowest scores the show ever received for an individual episode. The reviews used words like lazy, anticlimactic, cowardly, and baffling. Multiple reviewers described the experience of watching it as feeling cheated after 8 years of investment. One IMDb review, capturing a sentiment shared across dozens of others, compared the response to wanting to throw objects at the television. Fan forums were flooded within minutes of the episode ending. The Reddit reaction was documented by multiple entertainment journalists as one of the more extreme negative audience responses to a series finale in recent television history. The critical response was more measured in the immediate aftermath, but shifted significantly over time. Mike Hale of the New York Times said in his original review that he bought the ending. Mary McNamara of the Los Angeles Times focused her praise on Carpenter's performance while describing the sibling farewell as the send-off the show deserved. But both reviewers were engaging with the finale in isolation, in the hours after it aired, before the full weight of its choices had time to settle. In the years that followed, the reception grew progressively worse. The Wikipedia article on the finale states this plainly. Reception toward the finale grew more negative in subsequent years, with many naming it among the worst series finales of all time. The lumberjack ending became shorthand in television criticism for a specific kind of failure. A show avoiding the conclusion its premise required by escaping into ambiguity that reads as indifference rather than art. Showtime's own leadership eventually confirmed the failure publicly. Gary Levine, Showtime's entertainment president, said plainly, "We did not do it justice in the end." That statement from the network that produced and aired the show is as direct an institutional acknowledgement of a creative failure as television gets. The network did not defend the ending or argue that the reaction was unfair. It admitted the show had not been served by how it concluded. Showrunner Scott Buck's stated intention for the finale had been to leave things open, to let the audience decide what Dexter's ending meant, to avoid a definitive conclusion in favor of something ambiguous that could be read multiple ways. This is a legitimate creative philosophy in some contexts. Ambiguity works when it emerges from a story that has genuinely grappled with its central questions and chooses to leave the final answer open because the question is genuinely complex. Dexter's finale ambiguity does not emerge from that kind of grappling. The lumberjack in Oregon is not a complex image that rewards multiple readings. It is a man who has escaped all consequences, abandoned his son with a woman he met a few seasons earlier, removed his own sister from life support without anyone's knowledge or consent, and is now living alone in the woods. The image does not invite reflection. It invites the question of what 8 seasons of television were building toward if this is where they end. The most damning comparison available to the Dexter finale is the Breaking Bad finale, which aired 1 week before it on a competing network. Breaking Bad ended in September 2013. Its finale drew nearly 11 million viewers and received near-universal praise from both critics and audiences. It was a story about a man who broke bad and paid for it, who faced the consequences of his choices, who could not escape what he had become, who died as a result of everything he had set in motion. It was a conclusion that honored the weight of everything that preceded it. Dexter ended the same week with a story about a man who broke bad and became a lumberjack. The contrast was inescapable, and the internet made sure it was not ignored. The 2 finales aired within days of each other and were discussed together constantly in the weeks that followed, the quality gap between them functioning as a kind of accidental illustration of what a long-form drama owes its audience when it reaches its last episode. Michael C. Hall himself described the original finale's reception in language that left no room for interpretation. He said the ending was mystifying at best to people, and went on to list the adjectives that followed: confounding, exasperating, frustrating, as though reading from a list of responses he had been hearing for years. Hall had spent the 8 years between the original finale and the New Blood revival being asked by fans and journalists whether Dexter would ever return, and his answers during that period, consistently non-committal, never fully closing the door, suggested a man who understood that the story had not been properly finished and was uncertain whether it ever could be. Clyde Phillips, watching from outside, had known since 2013 how he would have ended it. The execution table, the victims in the gallery, the life flashing through a dying man's mind. An ending that said clearly and without ambiguity, the code did not hold. The law caught up eventually, and every person Dexter Morgan killed was still dead, regardless of what he told himself about deserving it. That ending never aired. The one that did air became a permanent fixture in discussions of television's greatest disappointments, mentioned alongside other infamous finales, used as a reference point for what happens when a show loses its way in its final stretch and cannot find its way back before the credits roll for the last time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the story did not actually end in 2013. Showtime had other plans, and the man who had the execution table ending in his head for 8 years was about to get a second chance to finish what the original series could not. Whether that second attempt truly fixed what the lumberjack broke, and what it cost to find out, is a question with a specific and revealing answer. Section 9. The original ending that never was. Clyde Phillips' execution table vision. 8 years passed between the Dexter series finale and the moment Showtime officially announced a revival. During those 8 years, Michael C. Hall gave dozens of interviews. Journalists asked him repeatedly whether he would return to the role. His answers were always some version of the same careful non-answer. He was not closing the door. He was not sure. He would need the right circumstances. He would need to feel that there was something worth returning for. He never said never. He never said yes. He held the question open, the way someone holds a door open when they are not certain whether the person behind them is still following. Clyde Phillips watched those interviews from the outside. He had been gone from the show since 2009. He had spent the years after Dexter running other projects. He served as showrunner for the final 3 seasons of Nurse Jackie on Showtime, keeping a professional relationship with the network even while being entirely absent from the show he had built. Every time an interview with Hall circulated where Dexter came up, someone would send it to Phillips. He would call Hall. They would talk about it. Nothing would happen. Then the cycle would repeat. What Phillips carried through all of those 8 years was a specific ending. Not a vague idea, not a general direction. A scene, fully imagined, with a specific structure borrowed from a specific piece of literature, designed to do one specific thing. Tell the truth about what Dexter Morgan was and what his life of killing actually meant. He revealed this ending publicly in September 2013, in an interview with E! Online, days after the actual series finale aired. He had never shared it before. He was careful to frame it as what he personally would have done had he stayed, not a criticism of the people who made the ending that aired, but a window into the version of the conclusion that existed in his head and never made it to the screen. The scene works like this. The final episode ends with Dexter waking up. The audience thinks for a moment that everything has been a dream, a common enough device that viewers would recognize it immediately and brace for a cheap resolution. Then the camera begins to pull back, slowly, wider and wider, until the full picture becomes clear. Dexter is not in bed. He is not in Miami. He is strapped to a table in a Florida state prison. The lethal injection has already been administered. The drugs are moving through his system. He is dying. Through the window of the execution chamber, visible in the observation gallery where witnesses sit during executions, are every person Dexter killed or whose death he was responsible for across the entire run of the series. The Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell. The Ice Truck Killer, Brian Moser. Dexter's biological brother, killed in the Season 1 finale. Sergeant James Dokes, framed and burned alive to protect Dexter's secret. Maria LaGuerta, the Miami Metro captain who spent Season 7 trying to clear Dokes' name and was killed by Deborah to protect Dexter. Rita Bennett, Dexter's wife, murdered by the Trinity Killer because Dexter's double life brought Trinity into their world. Lila West, the woman who killed Dokes and was later killed by Dexter in Paris. Every major death, every weekly kill, all of them present, watching as the execution proceeds. The entire series, all 8 seasons, all 95 episodes preceding this final one, would be revealed in that moment as the life flashing before a condemned man's eyes. Everything the audience watched happened inside Dexter's mind, in the seconds between the injection beginning and his heart stopping. The elaborate kills, the investigations, the relationships, the escapes, the seasons of near misses. All of it was the final electrical storm of a dying brain, replaying a life of violence in the only time left to it. Phillips said this idea came from a short story written by Ambrose Bierce in 1890, titled An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. In that story, a man is being hanged during the American Civil War. The rope breaks. He falls into the river below, swims free, runs through the woods, makes it home, sees his wife and children, reaches out to them, and then the rope catches. His neck snaps. The entire escape, the entire journey home, happened inside the 2 or 3 seconds between the initial drop and his death. Bierce wrote a story that takes place in the space between a heartbeat and the end of one. Phillips wanted Dexter to work the same way. The literary architecture of this ending is elegant in a way that the lumberjack in Oregon is not. An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is not an obscure reference. It is one of the most anthologized American short stories ever written, included in high school and college literature courses for over a century. Bierce's story works because the escape feels completely real while it is happening. The reader is inside the condemned man's experience, feeling the cold water, the exhausted muscles, the desperate hope. The horror of the ending lands because the investment in the escape was genuine. The 2 or 3 seconds of dying contain an entire vivid world. Phillips' version of the Dexter finale would have created the same structure at television scale. Every season of rooting for Dexter, every escape celebrated, every kill watched with something approaching satisfaction. All of it would be reframed in the final 60 seconds as the contents of a dying man's mind. The audience's experience of the show would not be negated. It would be recontextualized. The investment would remain real, but the meaning of that investment would shift. Because the execution table means Dexter was caught. He was tried. He was convicted. He was sentenced to death, and the sentence was carried out. The law that the show spent 8 seasons bending around him finally closed. The victims in the observation gallery are not there as punishment. They are there as witnesses. They are present for the ending of the man responsible for their deaths, looking through the glass at the conclusion of something that began with each of them. This ending would have accomplished something the actual finale completely refused to attempt. It would have held Dexter accountable. Not in a punishing, moralistic way. Not in a way that lectured the audience about the 8 seasons they spent rooting for a killer. The execution table ending does not tell the audience they were wrong to enjoy the show. It tells them the show knew what it was all along. It says that the writers understood the moral weight of what they were asking viewers to participate in, and that the conclusion honors that weight rather than evading it. The lumberjack ending evades it. Dexter fakes his death and disappears into the Pacific Northwest. No trial, no reckoning. No acknowledgement from the story that the hundreds of people he killed across 8 seasons were people, with weight, with families, with the right to exist. He walks away. He stares at the camera from a small house in Oregon. The screen goes dark. The show is over, and nothing was paid. Phillips, in the E! Online interview, was generous about the ending that actually aired. He said he thought the creative team did a good job with the final episode, and that he had no problem with their choices. This is a professional courtesy, the kind of thing you say publicly about colleagues you worked with and respect. His actual feelings about the post-season 4 period are visible in the other things he said in other interviews, where he described the show going off the rails and the character becoming untethered. The courtesy toward the finale exists alongside a clear-eyed view of what the show became after he left. What makes the execution table ending particularly striking is how completely it solves the show's central problem. The premise problem, the ticking clock inside every season, the impossibility of letting Dexter win forever without the ending feeling dishonest, is resolved by that ending in a single scene. The clock ran out. The execution table is the answer to the question the show had been asked since its first episode and had spent 8 seasons refusing to answer directly. Can Dexter keep doing this forever? No, he cannot. He was caught, tried, and executed. The entire series was the last seconds of that. The scene with all the victims watching is the most important element. It is the show acknowledging, in its final image, that these were real people. The victims Dexter killed across 8 seasons are largely absent as human beings from the show's emotional landscape. They function as targets, as moral permission for the audience to enjoy the kill. as evidence that Dexter's code is working. They do not have wives or children or morning routines or favorite songs or things they were going to do next week. They are present as proof of guilt, not as people. The execution table ending would have put all of them back in the frame, looking through the glass, present, accounted for, not forgotten. Clyde Phillips left the show in late 2009 for personal reasons that were completely understandable. His family was in the East. His daughter was growing up without him for 9 months of every year. He was paying for a life he was not living. These are real and legitimate reasons to make a major professional decision, and nothing about the creative failure of seasons 5 through 8 changes the validity of why he left. But the execution table ending is a document of what was lost when he walked away. Not just the ending itself, the vision behind it. Phillips understood that Dexter was a story about accountability deferred. Every season, accountability was supposed to get closer. Every near miss, every escaped consequence, every Dokes and LaGuerta and Quinn who got close and then was neutralized. All of it was supposed to be tension building toward an inevitable conclusion where the deferral ended and the accounting began. The execution table is that accounting. Every victim in the gallery is a line in the ledger. The injection is the final settlement. Without Phillips, the show lost the person who held that vision. The writers who followed him were not bad writers. They were writers working without a destination, building each season as its own unit without a larger map to place it on. The execution table existed in one man's head and stayed there for 8 years while the show made its own very different choices. In 2019, Showtime president Gary Levine called Phillips. He told him the time was right to bring Dexter back. Phillips had spent years thinking about how the story should have ended, and whether there was a version of a return that could address what the original finale left unfinished. Michael C. Hall was ready. The conversations that had been cycling through years of interviews and phone calls crystallized into an actual project. Dexter: New Blood was announced in October 2020. It would be a 10-episode limited series set 10 years after the events of the original finale. Phillips was the showrunner. Hall was back. The pitch, as Phillips described it in multiple interviews, was built around a specific commitment. This time, the story would end honestly. Dexter would die. Phillips said he knew this from the beginning, before the writer's room was assembled, before scripts were written, before any of the 10 episodes were shot. He presented it to Hall and to Showtime, and built the entire limited series backward from that conclusion. The execution table ending from 2013 could not be used directly. The original series had aired. The audience knew the show's history. A reveal that the entire 8-season run happened inside a dying man's head would not work as a revival device. It would negate the continuation itself. So Phillips needed a different way to arrive at the same destination. Different mechanics, same moral conclusion. Dexter Morgan does not get to walk away. The solution he found was Harrison. Dexter's son, the baby on the blood-soaked floor from the season 4 finale, now a teenager, arriving unannounced at his father's door in a small, upstate New York town. Harrison had grown up without Dexter. He had been left with Hannah McKay and had eventually been on his own, carrying his own darkness, his own trauma, his own version of the thing his father carried. Father and son reunite, and the season explores whether the darkness passes from one generation to the next. Whether what Harry did to Dexter, channeling violence into a code rather than treating it, produces the same result when Dexter does it to Harrison. The answer the season arrives at is that it cannot continue. Harrison, having learned who his father really is, having seen what the code produces and what it costs, shoots Dexter dead in the final episode. His dying words are, "Let me die so my son can live." The moral logic of the execution table ending: Dexter does not get to keep going, the accounting arrives, the people he killed matter, is preserved. The mechanism is different, the destination is the same. Phillips described the decision in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter after the finale aired. He said that after the bad taste of Season 8, he and the creative team knew that having Dexter escape and continue would mean the storytelling was done. He said the legitimacy and integrity of the character required the show to end this way. He used the word inevitable. That word is interesting. Inevitable is what a good ending feels like when you reach it. Not surprising in a cheap way, but recognized. The sense that the story was always going to come here, that the pieces were always pointed in this direction, that the conclusion honors everything that came before it by being the only conclusion that could have honestly followed from all of it. The execution table ending would have been inevitable in exactly that way. Harrison shooting Dexter in New Blood reaches for the same quality through different means. Whether it achieves it, whether the revival truly fixes what the original finale broke, or whether it simply replaces one unsatisfying conclusion with a more palatable one, is something the audience and critics came to different conclusions about. What is not in dispute is the gap between the ending that existed in Clyde Phillips' head in 2009 and the ending that aired in 2013. That gap is the clearest single measurement of what the show lost when its architect walked away at the peak of its power. The execution table sat in one man's imagination for 8 years, while the show made its own choices and arrived at a lumberjack in Oregon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The 10 episodes of New Blood were Phillips's attempt to bridge that gap. And the specific way that attempt succeeded and failed, the specific things it got right and the specific things it could not fix no matter how hard it tried, reveals something important about whether any ending could have truly redeemed a premise that was always, from its very first frame, carrying the weight of an impossible promise. Section 10. Dexter, New Blood. Killing the character to admit the premise was always wrong. Dexter Morgan had been a lumberjack in Oregon for 8 years by the time Showtime decided something needed to be done about it. The lumberjack ending had not aged well. Television had continued moving forward after September 2013, producing finales that honored their premises and conclusions that felt earned. And the contrast with what Dexter had done kept the wound fresh. Every conversation about bad series finales included it. Every ranked list of television disappointments put it near the top. The ending had become its own cultural object, not the conclusion of a show, but a warning label attached to it. Something critics referenced when describing what a long-running drama owed its audience and failed to deliver. Michael C. Hall spent those 8 years being asked about it. He gave the same careful answers he always gave, not closing the door, not walking through it either. But the language he used when describing the original finale was not the language of someone defending a creative decision he believed in. He called it mystifying at best. He listed the adjectives that followed it in the public conversation: confounding, exasperating, frustrating, without pushback, without arguing that the audience had misread what the show intended. He validated the disappointment without quite saying he shared it. But the validation was itself a statement. Gary Levine, Showtime's entertainment president, called Clyde Phillips on July 1st, 2019. He told Phillips that Michael was ready. Phillips had been in contact with Hall across the years since the finale, the two of them having versions of the same conversation about whether there was a way back and what that way might look like. The call from Levine moved the conversation from hypothetical to real. Phillips began developing what would become Dexter: New Blood. The limited series was announced publicly in October 2020. 10 episodes, set 10 years after the events of the original finale. Phillips as showrunner, Hall back as Dexter. The production began filming in February 2021, primarily in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, which served as the physical stand-in for the fictional upstate New York town of Iron Lake, where the story takes place. Phillips said there were 119 days of filming total. The show premiered on November 7, 2021, on Showtime. The premise of New Blood places Dexter in Iron Lake under a false identity. He is living as a man named Jim Lindsay, working in an outdoor sporting goods store, dating the local chief of police, Angela Bishop, and by all appearances living a quiet, contained life, completely removed from the violence that defined his previous existence. He has not killed in 10 years. He has suppressed the dark passenger so completely that when a deer wanders into his path during a morning run in the opening minutes of the first episode, he lets it go rather than giving in to the urge. The town loves Jim Lindsay. He is helpful, warm, present in the community in a way that Dexter Morgan in Miami never quite was. The name Jim Lindsay is itself a deliberate signal to attentive viewers, a nod to Jeff Lindsay, the author of the novels from which the original show was adapted. Phillips plants this detail as an acknowledgement of the source material and as a small joke for people who know the history of the franchise. It is the kind of specific, self-aware choice that characterizes the best of the early seasons, and its presence in the very first episode of New Blood signals that Phillips is operating with a different level of care than the seasons that followed his original departure. The dramatic engine of the limited series arrives in two forms simultaneously. The first is Matt Caldwell, a wealthy and reckless young man whose behavior gets under Dexter's skin in the early episodes and eventually gives the dark passenger enough provocation to re-emerge after a decade of dormancy. Matt is killed. The killing restarts everything. The second is Harrison, Dexter's teenage son, who arrives unannounced at the door of Jim Lindsay's small house in Iron Lake and forces a confrontation that Dexter has been avoiding for 10 years. Harrison, played by Jack Alcott, is the most important new element New Blood introduces. He was a baby in the original series, present in the final image of Season 4, sitting on the blood-soaked floor next to his murdered mother, too young to understand anything that was happening around him. By New Blood, he is a teenager carrying the accumulated weight of a childhood spent without a father, passed between caregivers after Hannah McKay eventually moved on, arriving in Iron Lake with a quiet intensity that immediately signals he is not simply a plot device, but a character with his own specific damage. Alcott's performance received strong notices from critics. The scenes between Hall and Alcott, father and son navigating a relationship that is 10 years of absence trying to become something present, are the emotional core of the limited series and its most consistently successful element. The dynamic works because both performers commit to the specific awkwardness of it. This is not a reunion built on warmth. It is built on need and suspicion, and a shared darkness that neither of them knows yet how to talk about honestly. Phillips built the entire 10-episode arc backward from the conclusion. He knew before a single script was written that Dexter would die, and that Harrison would be the one to kill him. He presented this to Hall and to Showtime at the outset. The decision was not negotiable, and it was not arrived at through the process of writing. It was the premise of the revival. Everything the limited series does across its 10 episodes exists to make that final scene feel, in Philip's word, inevitable. The word he chose matters. Inevitable means the ending was always coming. It means the audience should reach the final scene feeling that the story was always pointed here, that nothing could have redirected it once it began, that the conclusion honors rather than betrays everything that preceded it. Inevitable is the opposite of The Lumberjack in Oregon, which felt like a detour into nothing, a show that could have gone anywhere and chose to go nowhere. The season builds toward Harrison's discovery of who his father really is. Angela, the police chief Dexter is dating, begins connecting dots across the season, linking Jim Lindsay to the Bay Harbor butcher case from Miami, following a chain of evidence that brings her closer to the truth. Angel Batista, the Miami Metro detective who had been present across all 8 original seasons, arrives in Iron Lake, and his presence accelerates the unraveling. Dexter's cover, which had held for 10 years, begins coming apart from multiple directions simultaneously. Harrison learns the truth through his own investigation and through direct confrontation with Dexter. He learns that his father is a serial killer. He learns about the code of Harry, the set of rules that governs who Dexter kills and how. He learns that his mother died because of who his father was and what his father's choices brought into their lives. And for a period, Harrison tries to accept all of this. He tries to understand it. He tries to see the code the way Dexter sees it, as a framework that turns something monstrous into something that serves a purpose. Then Dexter kills Logan. Logan is the high school wrestling coach in Iron Lake. He is one of the genuinely good people in the town, not a corrupt figure, not someone who has done something that puts him on the wrong side of any moral calculation. Dexter kills him because Logan is in the way. Dexter needs to escape the police station where he is being held, and Logan is the officer on duty. And killing Logan is the most direct path to the door. The code of Harry requires that Dexter only kill people who have done terrible things and escaped justice. Logan has not done terrible things. Logan is simply present at the wrong moment. This kill, more than any other single moment in the revival, is the argument the season has been building toward. The code breaks. Not because Dexter is provoked into something outside it, not because circumstances are ambiguous, but because when his own survival is at stake, he kills an innocent person without apparent hesitation. The thing Harry built, the thing that was supposed to contain the darkness and direct it towards something justifiable, collapses the moment it costs Dexter something real to maintain it. Harrison sees this. He confronts Dexter outside the police station. Dexter tells him to run, to get away, to start over somewhere else. Harrison refuses. He tells Dexter to turn himself in. Dexter tells Harrison that he cannot do that turning himself in would mean death, either from the legal system or from the people he has put away across the years. Harrison raises the rifle. Dexter, in his final moments, makes the one choice the code of Harry could never have predicted or governed. He chooses to die, so his son does not have to live with having let him go. His final words are, "Let me die, so my son can live." Harrison pulls the trigger. Phillips confirmed in every post-finale interview that this ending was decided before the writer's room opened. He told The Hollywood Reporter that after the bad taste of the original Season 8 finale, he and the team knew that having Dexter escape and continue would mean the storytelling was finished. He said the legitimacy, honesty, dignity, and integrity of the character, qualities he described as having been carefully built over almost a decade, required the show to end this way. He said he wanted viewers to feel sad at the loss and satisfied at the conclusion, to understand that this had to happen, that it was inevitable. He also said something simpler and more direct that cuts through everything else. He said, "Dexter is an anti-hero, which is still a hero we like, but he is still someone who kills people, and killing people is wrong." That sentence took 15 years to say out loud. The original series ran for 8 seasons without saying it. Season after season, the show built elaborate frameworks: the code, the victim's guilt, the narrative manipulation that kept Dexter sympathetic, specifically to avoid saying it directly. The audience was invited to enjoy the kills, to root for the escapes, to feel something like satisfaction when Dexter wrapped a monster in plastic and drove a blade through his chest. The show needed that invitation to function commercially. The moment it said, "Killing is wrong," plainly and without qualification, it was admitting that everything it had been asking the audience to enjoy was morally compromised. New Blood says it. Harrison shoots his father because killing people is wrong, and his father kills people, and no code and no framework and no carefully constructed system of targeting only the guilty changes that fundamental fact. The show arrives, in its 10th episode, at a conclusion that the premise had been pointing towards since the first frame of the pilot, and had spent 8 original seasons carefully steering away from. The critical reception of New Blood was meaningfully better than the original final seasons. Rotten Tomatoes recorded an approval rating of 77% based on 56 reviews, with an average score of 7.2 out of 10. The critical consensus on the site reads that the limited series, anchored by Hall's still compelling portrayal of the main character, helps restore some of the luster lost by the show's contentious finale. These are not the numbers of a masterpiece. 77% represents a qualified success rather than a triumph. But they are dramatically better than the reception that greeted the original Season 8, and the language critics used was the language of a show that had recovered its sense of purpose. Variety's review, published before the premiere, captured the mixed nature of the revival's achievement honestly. The review noted that while New Blood helps replace the bad taste of the original finale, it does not fundamentally redefine what Dexter is. It acknowledged that being better than the Scott Buck years is a meaningful accomplishment without being a transformative one. The Clyde Phillips years, the review noted, were also far from perfect. And New Blood, despite its stronger construction and clearer moral vision, carries the limitations of the franchise it is built on. Those limitations are visible throughout the 10 episodes. The high school scenes involving Harrison and his peers, the teen drama elements, the bullying, the romance with Angela's daughter Audrey, slow the revival in ways that even strong performances cannot entirely overcome. The decision to root part of Harrison's story in the rhythms of a high school drama sits awkwardly alongside the moral weight of the father-son central conflict. Variety's review specifically noted that, even with the potential for Harrison to be harboring his own dark passenger, his high school scenes do not generate the kind of tension the material elsewhere achieves. The Angela investigation thread, while dramatically functional, requires its own forms of convenient plotting. Angela connecting Jim Lindsay to the Bay Harbor butcher case involves a chain of reasoning that, as comic books analysis noted, relies on some narrative shortcuts that make the resolution feel slightly rushed compared to the original series' more drawn-out investigations. The show needs Angela to figure it out within 10 episodes, and the timeline of that discovery requires her to move faster than the evidence strictly supports. These are real limitations. They do not erase what New Blood achieves, but they prevent it from being the complete redemption the original finale's awfulness seemed to demand. What New Blood achieves, specifically and verifiably, is this: it kills Dexter Morgan. It kills him at the hands of the person whose existence is most directly connected to the cost of Dexter's choices. His son, whose mother died because of who Dexter was, whose childhood was shaped entirely by the consequences of a man who chose violence and built a code to justify it. It says, in the clearest possible terms, that the premise of the original show was always heading toward this conclusion, and that the original finale's failure was a failure to follow the story where it was always going. Phillips said after the finale that he knew from the beginning of his work on New Blood that Harrison would be the one to kill Dexter. He explained the thinking in an interview, referencing an idea he said he learned from years of therapy. A son has to kill his father so that he can be his own man. He was careful to clarify that he did not mean this literally in the real world, but as a way of understanding what the Harrison and Dexter story needed to conclude. Harrison cannot become his own person while Dexter is alive and teaching him the code. The code is the inheritance Harrison has to refuse. Refusing it in the world of this story means pulling the trigger. The irony sitting at the center of all of this is considerable. Clyde Phillips left the show after season 4 because he needed to be present for his own life, his family, his daughter growing up, the years he was missing by spending 9 months out of every 12 in Los Angeles. He left at the peak of the show's quality, carrying in his head the ending that would have given the original series the conclusion it deserved. He watched from the outside as the show ran 4 more seasons without that ending and produced the most criticized finale in Showtime's history. Then he came back. He ran 10 episodes. He killed Dexter. He said plainly, in plain language, the thing the original series had spent 8 years avoiding. Killing people is wrong, and a story about a man who kills people has to eventually say so. That admission, arriving 15 years after the pilot in the 10th episode of a revival miniseries, is the most honest thing the Dexter franchise ever produced. And the fact that it took a complete ending, a revival, and a second ending to get there confirms something the show's history makes difficult to argue against. The premise was always the problem. Not the casting, not the specific writing choices in specific seasons, not the showrunner changes, or the villain quality, or the reset habit, or the finale's failure of nerve. All of those things contributed. But underneath all of them, from the very first episode, was a promise the show could never honestly keep. That a man who kills people can be your hero indefinitely. That the code makes the killing acceptable. That the darkness can be managed without a cost too large to survive. New Blood was the show finally admitting that the promise was false. Harrison shooting Dexter is the story looking back at itself and saying, the code did not hold. The cost was too large. The ending that the original series avoided for 8 seasons was always the only honest ending available. Saying it took 15 years and required killing the character to do it. And yet, even after Harrison drove away from Iron Lake at the end of New Blood, even after Dexter died in the snow and the story appeared to have found its conclusion, Showtime was not finished. The franchise continued. A prequel series arrived. A sequel to the revival was ordered. The machine kept running, producing more Dexter content. More chapters in a story that had just been given what appeared to be its final and most honest ending. What that continuation reveals about the commercial reality of television, about what happens when a premise becomes a brand, and a brand becomes too valuable to let a good ending actually end things, is the final and most uncomfortable truth in the entire history of this franchise. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.